Welcome to the Weird and Wicked podcast. I'm Kristen,
And I'm Rachel.
and we're two sisters with a passion for the mysterious and the unknown. On our podcast, we will explore killer cases and the most puzzling phenomena.
Come with us down the rabbit hole where we will take a magnifying glass to the most bizarre, unnerving, and unbelievable stories. From true crime and conspiracy theories to ghosts and cryptids, we'll cover it all.
Today, we'll be talking about the luminous Radium Girls and how their story changed history forever.
This one really blows my mind.
It's definitely an interesting one. Let's get right into it, shall we?
Hell yeah. Warning: this episode contains mentions of severe illness and death. It is intended for mature audiences only. These stories are recounted from a number of sources that are listed in the show notes. Our discussion on this podcast is based solely on our own research and conclusions. Listener discretion is advised.
Okay, here we go. Episode 3.
Number 3, bitches!
Let's go.
Here we go.
This one's a really good one. I can't wait to get into it. So
Yeah.
let's just, without further ado.
Yeah, let's get into it.
In our world today, we have all kinds of lights everywhere. Phones, TVs, computers, streetlights, indoor lights, floodlights, flashlights. I could go on.
Yeah.
As time goes on, it has become nearly impossible to find true darkness unless you're out in the middle of nowhere or something.
That's true. Like with all that light pollution that exists now, it's truly hard to escape artificial light.
But what contributed to the rise of illuminated products like watches and clocks? I mean, besides the obvious advancements in technology that were happening. Before and throughout the 19th century, if you wanted to tell the time at night, you would need to light a candle in order to see your pocket watch or clock. But what if you were stuck in a situation where you couldn't light a candle, say in battle maybe? This issue would have a luminous solution in the beginning of the 20th century. Marie Curie and her husband Pierre discovered radium in 1898 when they were able to isolate it from pitchblende and conduct studies on the new element firsthand. However, they were quick to realize that this was much more dangerous than they had first thought.
So, pitchblende is actually a mineral that also goes by the name uraninite. I think I'm saying that right.
Uraninite, I think, yeah.
Uraninite, which some might know contains mostly uranium and obviously radium as well, and along with other material.
Right. Stick with me here, but from my understanding, to isolate radium, the Curies basically bought a whole bunch of this pitchblende material after the uranium had been isolated from it. Um, and apparently, this pitchblende material was pretty cheap after the uranium was taken out of it, because at the time it was pretty much useless. And from there, they started to really study how to extract or isolate the radium from the rest of the material that was there.
The reason they even did this in the first place was because they realized that pitchblende was still radioactive even after the uranium was removed. So, my question is, if they knew it was radioactive, coming from the same mineral that uranium comes from, which is also highly radioactive,
Right.
why did they continue so closely working with this material anyway? Like, they have to have known that it was dangerous and it would have all
Yeah,
these like harmful effects.
I guess just for science. It was Marie who began to study radium's possible practical applications. She believed that in small doses it could be beneficial to one's health. In fact, in the early days of these discoveries, medical professionals used radium as a method of cancer treatment. During the time the Curies studied radium, they noticed that it was having serious negative effects on their physical health. The work to isolate radium was demanding and exhausting, and they started to feel sick and physically exhausted. Their hands were often inflamed, swollen, and raw due to the fact that they were handling radioactive material on a daily basis. Marie even occasionally burned her arms from improperly working with the material.
It's crazy. They were truly dedicated to science
Yeah,
and
clearly they had a
studying
goal.
this.
Nothing
Yeah.
was gonna stop them.
Interestingly enough, it is Marie who actually coined the term radioactive. Although their
Mhm.
studies were highly dangerous to their health, the Curies persevered. As one of Marie's famous quotes goes, quote, I was taught that the way of progress was neither swift nor easy, end quote.
I mean, they truly thought that they were doing good. If it's like if there's a chance you can cure these fatal diseases like cancer, then they probably felt like it was worth it because in the end it would save more lives.
That's true. And there was all of this evidence from their studies that they were doing that it was doing so much good and have so much potential to change the medical field for the better. So
Right.
I kind of get it. Contrary to popular belief, radium does not glow on its own. In the early 20th century, radium was used in paint substances that usually included zinc sulfide phosphor, which, when combined, results in the luminous nature of the paint. Despite knowing the harmful effects of radium, people still believe that it was okay to handle in tiny amounts. The Radium Luminous Material Corporation, or the US Radium Corporation, at the time quickly took advantage of the glowing paint mixture by marketing it under the name Undark.
I can see why so many people were intrigued. Like, if I were a regular person in the 20s while this paint was blowing up, I would have been amazed.
Right?
Paint that glows, sign me up.
For
That'd be
real.
perfect for my prohibition party. I'm getting visions of like the Great Gatsby with
Oh my god,
glowing paint and
yes.
stuff.
Dude, it would be amazing.
Yeah,
Even the
it's clear why they were excited about it.
Absolutely. So, with World War One happening, the demand for watches, dials, and instruments painted with this mixture increased due to the fact that they were self luminous. Soldiers at battle, for example, could tell the time in the middle of the night, and if they had one of these self luminous watches, which I'm sure was insanely helpful.
Yeah, like, imagine you're in battle and you have orders to do something at this time.
Hmm.
How are you gonna know what time it is in the middle of the night?
Yeah,
Like,
like we said, are
you
you gonna
never
light a
know.
candle and give away
Yeah,
your cover
then everyone
maybe?
knows where you are. Yeah,
Exactly.
or you accidentally blow up your
Yeah,
your whole group because
exactly.
you accidentally light something that's not
Gosh,
supposed to be on fire.
it must have felt like such a
Oh,
crazy invention.
yeah,
It's cool to
Well, that's
think
why it was, like, so mass produced all of a
for
sudden too.
sure.
It's
It
like,
just, like,
this is
caught
extremely useful.
yeah, it caught on like wildfire, I can only imagine.
Right.
So, because of this, manufacturers were quick to adopt these paints, which they used to make self-luminous watches, aircraft switches, instrument dials, and more. Factories sprung up all over the country where workers would need to carefully paint each watch, for example, so the numbers, dials, and faces would automatically glow. The main three of these factories were located in Orange, New Jersey, Ottawa, Illinois, and Waterbury, Connecticut. It was here that mainly women were hired. The work was fairly easy if you had a steady hand and a good eye, and it paid well. You were even considered lucky to be working in one of these factories, especially because being around the radium dust would actually cause you to have a faint glow on your clothes, skin, and nails. Some women who were hired would even go as far as wearing their best party dress to work, so that when they were off and went out on the town to socialize, their dresses would glow. They were called ghost girls by others because of their glow and quickly became the early 1900s equivalent of local celebrities.
I'm sure they thought this was fabulous. I mean, I bet it was like a close sisterhood or like a club kind of where if her dress glows, she's special. Like other people who didn't have glowing dresses, they're nothing.
Boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also read in a source that some women would even line their lips and like put it on their faces with the paint.
Mhm.
So they had like a beautiful glowing face paint to match their glowing dress.
Right. It really puts a whole new meaning to the phrase, "You're glowing." Like
glowing. Yeah, for
Yeah.
real. I feel like this is why this story caught my attention when I first heard it because I love the idea of this, like, literally
Mhm.
glowing. I don't know, it's just
Yeah.
pretty. I
Yeah,
love
I know
it.
what you mean. One of these women who worked at the Orange, New Jersey location was named Amelia or Molly Maggia. And forgive us if we pronounce that wrong. We're not totally sure of some pronunciations, and we're not the
Mhm.
best either. So, Molly was an exceptional dial painter. At the factory, workers were told to point the tip of their paintbrushes with their lips or tongue in order to make it easier to paint with precision and detail. All day, every day, Molly would dip her brush in the glowing radium paint, apply it to the watch dials, lick the tip of the brush to point it, and repeat the process over and over again, just like all of her coworkers.
I know in one source it also stated that the women would ask the corporation about whether it was safe to be doing this, and the corporation, like, assured them that there wasn't anything to be concerned about, and now we know, unfortunately,
Right.
this was far from the truth.
Yeah, and I also read in another source that each dial painter had a quota, and I think it was
Oh,
around 150 or 200, maybe 250 watches a
a
day.
day.
So you can imagine like how much of this
How
substance
much
they
they're
were.
doing it, yeah.
She, among many other women employed by the U.S. Radium Corporation, were glad to be contributing to the war efforts while also making a decent living. Three of her six sisters, in fact, also worked in the same field. Molly, however, was among the first of the Radium Girls to suffer the devastating effects of radium ingestion, unfortunately. At first, it was just a toothache. After visiting the dentist, they told her the tooth needed to be removed. After this, the tooth beside it began to ache, too. They proceeded to extract this one as well. At the root of the now extracted teeth, painful, bloody ulcers formed. This quickly spread throughout all of Molly's upper and lower jaws. The condition of her lower jaw was so bad at one point that they had to just remove it completely.
Oh, it just sounds
Which is
horrible.
terrible. Yeah, I already have a huge fear of dentists in general. I
Yeah,
hate dentists so much.
my god.
Anything to do with dentists, no thanks. So I can't even imagine. Oh my god.
Yeah, and
And it must have
then
been so painful too.
yeah, like, so they extracted the one tooth, and I can only imagine she's thinking, "Okay, thank God. That's gonna
Yeah.
cure it, like, we're all good." And then they're like, "Okay,
Mhm.
let's extract this one," and it just continuously
Mhm.
keeps on getting worse and worse, and
Just kept getting worse.
I
Yeah.
don't think at this point she, like, realized it was from licking the paint all the time,
Mhm.
so it was just a
Right.
big old mystery as to, like, why this
Yeah.
was happening.
Eventually, 2 years after her first symptoms, Molly was the first radium girl to die. Doctors who examined her were confused and unsure of the exact cause of her death. They ended up chalking it all up to syphilis.
Yeah, because you have to have all your teeth and your lower jaw completely removed when you have
Yeah,
syphilis. It
that's definitely a
totally makes sense to
thing.
me.
Yeah. They were like, "It's gotta be syphilis."
I mean, I guess because she had those, like, sores in her mouth, but
Yeah,
to
that's
me,
a common symptom, but
that's still a stretch.
mhm. Yeah, I think it was also a way to, like, smear the Radium Girls' reputation, um, in a way, or at least Molly's reputation to kind of shut it down, sort of, like, this was her fault kinda thing.
Yeah, and, like, shift the blame away from
Right.
anything having to do with the company probably.
Mhm. As Molly's symptoms were worsening before her death, other women who worked as radium painters also began to have strikingly similar agonizing symptoms. Soon, controversy spread around. I cannot speak. I can't read today. Soon, controversy spread about the Radium Corporation and whether radium was safe to use, especially after the death of Molly Maja. I'm never gonna get
Nausea.
that right.
It's a
It just
hard
doesn't
one.
look like Maja.
It doesn't.
Other women who worked at the factories were experiencing absolutely horrible symptoms, such as their teeth falling out, anemia, and cancerous tumors. The deterioration of the jawbone became a common symptom among these women, so much so that it was later recognized as radium necrosis or radium jaw.
The name of that, radium necrosis, just sounds
Yeah.
excruciating. I
Ugh.
feel horrible for these women.
I agree. It definitely doesn't sound like something that you would want at all. Radium jaw, like,
Definitely
oof,
not. Ugh.
sounds painful.
In an effort to protect their business, the US Radium Corporation denied any connection of radium to the strange deaths of the women who were working in those factories. This didn't fix the problem, though. Radium soon became increasingly unpopular as more and more radium girls suffered terrible deaths, which forced the corporation to commission independent studies on the radium paint. Their findings were not surprising. It was confirmed that the women had died from direct and consistent radium exposure that they faced in their everyday work.
Ugh. The company was not having this, though.
No.
They didn't wanna see their business go down, so they decided to be extremely slimy about everything, and they actually ordered new studies to be conducted that would have the exact opposite results, that radium was safe, right?
Yep, and they published these studies,
Of
the
course.
not the accurate ones, the fake ones, all so they can keep making a quick buck at the expense of all these women.
Mhm. It's terrible.
It's horrible. Because of these false studies that were published, though, the public continued using products with radium, and the companies continued employing people to paint with the undark paint and telling them to lick the brush. It's horrible.
And it's so sad because these women who were suffering through all these horrible symptoms knew this was not because of anything else but the paint. Like, at this point, they knew
Yeah, they
that
knew.
they kind of put the pieces together. The only people that were getting sick like this were the Radium Girls or the dial
Mhm.
painters. They tried to warn other women about it, but their efforts were being shut down at every turn.
Right, and to these companies that use the radium paint, these women were expendable,
Right.
obviously. They knew that they were getting away with something horrible, actively being the cause of future pain, agony, and death to anyone working in their factories. Meanwhile, the previous Radium Girls are dying, and
Yeah, it's so sad.
yeah, they're just not doing anything about it. Scummy corporate America. That's all I gotta
Yeah.
say.
Only the beginning of it.
Yeah. These factory owners and even the man who invented the paint knew that it was not safe. How do we know this? Well, because workers who manufactured the paint and handled it before it went into the hands of the painters used protective gear when being anywhere near it. They used lead screens, masks, and tongs that helped them keep a distance from the radioactive element.
So this was an obvious cover up, basically.
Yeah, it's ridiculous to me that they thought that they could just get away with this.
Yeah, meanwhile, like, the people literally making the paint are wearing all this protective gear or taking all these precautions around
Mhm.
it. It's like, how did they even think that they could just keep this up the whole time
Make it
without anyone calling them out?
it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, they have all this protective gear, and these women are ingesting the material.
Yeah, literally, like, eating it basically as
Yeah.
they point their brushes on their lips
What made them think
and
that that
using
was
it to, like,
okay?
paint their well, I think I read in one source that one girl painted her teeth
Oh,
with
yeah, I
the
did see
paint
that.
to make them glow.
Mhm.
Ugh,
God,
so it was really bad.
horrible.
And on top of that, Marie and Pierre Curie had warned the director of the US Radium Corporation of the dangers of radium before the undark paint was in production. Marie herself required her staff at the Radium Institute to take several precautions when handling the substance. She would have them take blood tests on a regular basis and make sure to get plenty of exercise and fresh air during their workdays.
I love this because as if doing this would keep them from getting radiation
Yeah,
poisoning. Like, "Yeah, go
in
take a little
hindsight,
walk."
it was pretty useless to be doing these things if you're around that substance.
I was gonna say at least she was having them take blood tests.
Yeah.
So, like, clearly she knew that that was something to keep an eye on, but
It's
still.
weird to me though because they didn't mention like if people tested with like I don't know if they had high levels of radiation in their blood, what happened? Like, did they
True.
just get sent
Did they do
home or
anything?
did they just keep working? Like, it was kind of unclear
Mhm.
what came about from all
That's
these
true.
precautions that she was making them take, if it was enforced or not, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that wasn't super reported
Yeah,
upon or even talked about really.
yeah, just something I wonder about.
Mhm.
Many people had died due to radium exposure in the past, even before these factors existed. Warning signs didn't end there, though. Dr. Sabin von Soschaki sounds funny to me, but I'm just guessing that's the
It's an
pronunciation of that.
interesting name. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
he was the inventor of the radium-based paint on dark and technical director of the U.S. Radium Corporation. He found himself obsessed with the radium. He first came into close contact with it and experienced its effects firsthand when a small bit of the substance actually got on the tip of the nail of his left index finger. And it's said in the sources that this contact with the radium was so painful to him that he proceeded to cut off the tip of his finger to alleviate the pain because it was just burning through his skin. It was,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little
Dude
bit graphic, but
dude was
oh,
crazy. And
yeah,
so like this is happening. It gets on his finger and he cuts off his finger. Meanwhile, he's letting these watch painters just lick his paint day
yeah.
in, day out, all day long at
Hmm.
work, not saying shit just because he wants to make some money and he knows it's like doing really well.
Yeah, it just goes to show that he clearly knew the harm in like being around the substance alone, like
Oh, yeah.
if you slip up and it gets on you, you're gonna have to cut your finger off, right? You know, like
Yeah,
he knew that it was bad, but he wanted the reputation and the success of his company over the health of the workers that were there,
that's true.
which is pretty slimy, if
Pretty
you ask
sad.
me.
Yeah.
One source we found stated that, quote, by 1917, he was so heavily contaminated with radioactivity that his presence caused false readings when measuring the levels of purity of radium salts taken in the electroscope laboratory at the plant, end quote.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah,
The fact that he is setting off these
he is
readings,
literally radioactive.
he is radioactive, like, no one go
Yeah,
near him.
that's kind of a red flag. Maybe he shouldn't be working in that lab anymore, being around other people.
Right?
I mean, it's got to affect the people that he works with.
Yeah, it's got to. If he's making these go off, he has to be, I was gonna say, radiating. Pun
Right.
intended. Radiation. Like,
Right. Yeah.
oh, it's crazy.
Finally, in 1925, a test was run to definitively find what caused the death of the women who worked with radium by a pathologist named Harrison Martland. After it was run, it was finally confirmed without question that the radium had been slowly breaking down their bones until it eventually killed them.
Researching this part of the story truly gave me the chills. I read in one source that they
Yeah.
actually examined Molly's bones, specifically
Hmm.
her jawbone, to see like what was going on. Apparently, her bones were literally glowing. On
Yeah.
top of this, her jawbone especially had like so many holes in it. Like
Hmm.
sources say that there were so many holes that her jaw looked like it was like a honeycomb structure, like so
That's why
hollow
That's
and
why she was
so.
having so much pain
Oh my
there's your
god,
answer, like, her jaw was falling apart.
literally.
It's chilling to think about. The thing I find the most interesting about this is basically if her bones were glowing and were still plenty radioactive, that means the women who were still working at these factories probably had glowing bones too, which
Yeah,
were also radioactive.
that's a good point, which also means they would have a similar fate to her,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But
Mhm.
I mean, at least they know the exact effects of radium on the human body. It's sad to say, but
Mhm. Yeah.
oh, it's
In the
crazy.
worst way possible, they found out.
They found out, yeah.
After radium is ingested, 80% exits the body through feces. The other 20% enters the bloodstream. From there, because the body treats it like calcium, radium mainly collects in the bones. This is where it comes into contact with the bone marrow and degrades it, causing mutations in the bones in the body's bone cells.
This degradation of the bone cells was seen in so many of the girls' cases, especially with the radium jaw that just ate away at the bones in their face.
Yeah, I mean they ingested it through their mouth by licking the brushes, so I can see why the radium jaw was so common. It was like the direct contact, but I could imagine this was happening in all the bones throughout their body. Obviously, it was after examining or
That's right.
examining,
Yeah.
examining, making new
Examining.
words here.
Now that you mention that, I remember reading, I think it was one of the original Radium Girls who eventually had to use crutches if she was planning on like standing or walking for long periods of
Uh-huh.
time. Like it just hurt so much to walk. I'm assuming her like feet bones and her leg bones were
Mhm.
degrading, just like these girls' jaws too. So clearly, it must have been affecting their whole body, like all of the bones in their body.
Yeah, that's why they were so weak. I mean,
Mhm.
your
Gosh.
skeleton is literally being broken down slowly,
Oh, it's crazy.
which sounds so painful.
Mhm. After the cause of death was confirmed, it was clear that the use of radium paints in the manufacturing of these watches and instruments needed to be stopped immediately for the safety of the public. The women who were experiencing symptoms knew this. 5 of these women from the New Jersey factory sued the US Radium Corporation due to the fact that they had been completely misled about the dangers of working with the undark paint. They were specifically instructed to lick the tips of their brushes as a part of their job, which led to significant radium poisoning. As a result, women who worked in these factories suffered all kinds of radiation related illnesses, and the majority were doomed to die from the exposure. These 5 radium girls were fully aware of what was ahead for them, but they still wanted to try to do some good for the other women and colleagues who were still employed at these factories. They sued the corporation in 1927, but their efforts were hindered by a 2-year statute of limitations. Even when they could finally testify in January of 1928, the US Radium Corporation was granted an adjournment until September.
Okay, so obviously they were doing everything they could to possibly, or everything they could do to possibly delay the lawsuit. It's so sick to me
Yeah.
because these women are literally dying. Like,
Mhm.
they don't have much time left, and they're still not being acknowledged. Like, it's horrible. And these companies knew this. Like, they
Yeah,
knew what would happen if you came into close contact with radium.
absolutely.
So they knew these women. They were probably just waiting to see if they would die soon enough for them to not have to deal with a lawsuit, I'm sure.
Probably. Yeah. So, obviously, this caused a lot of media backlash. Newspapers everywhere were publishing the New Jersey Radium Girls story, exposing the injustice to the rest of the public. On June 4th, 1928, the women accepted an out of court settlement, and the U.S. Radium Corporation wouldn't take full responsibility for the deaths of the women until 1938, 10 years later.
Ugh,
Yeah.
it's horrible.
This final settlement was reached when a dying radium girl by the name of Catherine Wolfe Donahue, along with other dial painters from the Ottawa factory, decided to sue the Radium Dial Company. Catherine was cunning when it came to seeking out justice for these girls. Although she had severe radium poisoning symptoms, she managed to take it to court to testify against the corporation. During her testimony, she collapsed because she was so weakened by these symptoms. This did not stop her, though. Catherine finished her testimony from her sick bed at home. Ultimately, the women won the lawsuit and finally were recognized for the suffering that they were going through.
Finally. I'm
Finally.
so glad they won and came to a settlement, but it's still so sad because a lot of these women unfortunately passed away before they saw any of the money that they were owed from the lawsuit.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So,
At the very least, they were able to finally expose the US Radium Corporation and all the factories that were using the undark paint or
mhm,
just these radium paints in general.
yeah.
No one would unknowingly be subjected to the horrible consequences of radium exposure any longer, which was really good at least.
Yeah. I guess another positive came out of the case too. Because the company was held accountable for the damages to their workers' lives, this became a standard across the board for employees and employers. It became punishable in court to put employees in danger, and if another instance ever happened where workers' health was affected, they could claim damages.
It was the beginning of workers' compensation as we know it today.
Yeah, exactly. So, remember the scientists who discovered radium, Marie and Pierre Curie? They also suffered the consequences of being exposed to the element for too long. Pierre once fastened a tube of radium to his arm and kept it there for 10 hours. After the 10 hours, he removed the tube and noticed what appeared to be a skin lesion exactly where it had been attached to his arm, which is gross. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, that's really bad. Marie Curie actually died in 1934 from aplastic pernicious anemia, determined to be caused by her exposure to radium over the years of her studies of the deadly radioactive substance.
Yeah, it's sad that she died from handling this substance that was so harmful, but she
Hmm.
really did contribute a lot to the science of it and, in general, our knowledge of the element radium.
Right, yeah. We see this all the time throughout history too, where scientists
True.
will go so far as to make personal sacrifices all the
Mhm.
time for the good of like future generations. It's kind of like if you had a chance or if you thought there was a chance to cure cancer or Parkinson's or something like that, but the con is that it takes a serious toll on your health and possibly kills you, would you do it? And I
Yeah,
think a lot of people would probably say yes if it saves countless lives, then
countless
one
lives.
life means nothing, you know?
Mhm.
So I see where they were coming from, kind of wanting to
Mhm.
continue to study it. Marie and Pierre Curie were the first co winners in history of the Nobel Prize. On orders of the French President Mitterrand, Pierre and Marie's bodies were moved and reburied into the Pantheon, which is so cool. It's like the
Yeah.
Pantheon, if you don't know, if anyone doesn't know, um, only like super revered French um, people are buried there, pretty much. So
Mhm.
they were like super special. In 1928, Dr. Sabin, remember that guy? Uh, the dude that cut off the tip of his own finger?
Insane.
Yeah, he died from his own invention. It was stated in a New York Times article from 1928 that the presence of radium was discovered in his body about 3 years before his death. After this discovery, Dr. Sabin had a positive outlook and truly thought he could recover. It wasn't until 2 years later that he fell extremely ill and would receive 13 blood transfusions throughout his last year alive. 13 in 1 year.
13. That's a lot.
Yeah. Despite his hopes for recovery, he died from aplastic anemia at the age of 45.
It's extremely fitting that he died from the effects of radiation poisoning, since
Yeah.
he was part of the whole Undark marketing plan and everything.
Mhm.
It's a different kind of justice, one might say.
Mhm. It's kind of like he was destroyed by the one thing that he thought would bring him so much success. And yeah, it did bring him a lot of success at the time, but
Mhm.
now everybody's going to remember him as the guy who didn't speak up and say this probably isn't a good idea. you know,
Yeah, it's extremely ironic, and I kinda love it.
very fitting.
Not to be dark or anything,
Yeah.
but
Although the Radium Girls didn't quite get a happy ending for themselves personally, they changed history forever through their sacrifice. Their lawsuits are what made it possible for so many workers for generations to win compensation for unfortunate occupational hazards, especially those that were realized when it was already too late. Their sacrifice will never go unappreciated, and they definitely won't be forgotten. To this day, if you visit their online obituaries, people still leave virtual flowers for them to commemorate their lives. I was on the website, one of the websites, and the last um, bouquet or whatever was given to Molly uh,
Oh.
Magia or
Mhm.
Maja. The most recent one was literally, I think, in October of 2022.
That's
So
right, I
it's like
remember you
people
saying
are
that.
continually paying their respects.
Mhm.
In Illinois, a memorial statue in the form of Molly Maja, the first Radium Girl to pass away, stands as a symbol to their sacrifice. And I think this is just adorable, but every year around Christmas time, locals will drape a handmade red scarf around the statue to keep her warm during winter, which
I
is
love
so
that.
sweet.
I love how it's handmade too, like,
Yeah, a
so
nice
much
little red
thought
scarf. Yeah.
goes towards these women because I think
Mhm.
people understand that they thought that they were having, like, a badass job and making,
Yeah.
really good money and,
They were
like
contributing to the war efforts,
Yep.
which probably made them feel really special too. They were part of
Mhm.
it.
They were pretty
So
much, like we said, local celebrities because they glowed when they went out and
right.
whatnot, and it just went downhill so I mean, I wouldn't say, I guess, quickly, but it went downhill for
Yeah.
sure for them.
Fairly quickly or
Yeah, relative,
relatively.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah,
It's
so
sad.
that's the story of the Radium Girls, and people still remember them today. I'm sure it's a pretty popular story. I think a
Mhm,
lot of different podcasts and shows cover, especially YouTube on YouTube, you'll find a ton of videos about them. It's everywhere. I think there's even a website dedicated to them, so you can go and like read about each one. There's like a ton of different girls who have their own little biography or obituary, I guess you could
mhm,
say, on that website, which is really cool. So you can read about each one as on top of that, you can also read all of our notes and everything, and see pictures of all of them, if you go take a look at our blog on our
mhm.
website.
Yeah, we'll have the blog up, we'll have our whole I wanna say report because we treat it
Yeah,
like a report, but, like,
yeah,
all of
it's
our
basically research papers.
yeah.
Yeah.
All the information we found, as well as the sources and some photos. The photos are very, like, intriguing to look
Mhm.
at.
Some of them are a little bit scary,
Yeah.
definitely, because there's a few that are actually real photos of some of the women while they
Mhm.
were sick. Um, so it's hard to see that, but it hits hard.
It
It
does.
really makes you realize, like, what they went through.
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
that was episode 3.
another great story for you guys. If you have any suggestions, feel free to head over to our website. You
Let
can
us
also probably find
know.
the link on our socials, but you can make suggestions for different cases and episodes that we do. So definitely do that if you have something in mind.
Thanks for listening, you guys, to the Weird and Wicked podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you drop a like and leave us a review.
And make sure to subscribe and follow us on all of our socials so you know when the next episode is up. Bye.
See ya. See ya.
See ya. Later, dudes.